Welcome to another episode of the Unleash the Future of Work, a guide podcast. And today, I hope that you are safe and healthy no matter where you are. And I want to introduce my amazing guest, a good friend of mine, awesome brother, DAndres Ealy, who is one of the leading product managers in the LA area who works with PlayVS. He's co-founded or worked during the early stage of several startups in mobile, web, and high tech with over $31 million raised. That's 31 million, y'all. 31 million. He's a stellar product manager that values a data-driven approach and user behavior insights, and he's incredibly passionate about using technology to make people's lives better. And today, Dre and I are just going to be chopping it up and talking tech. One, but two, we're also going to be discussing a little bit about how he got started in product management, his story, and his thoughts on the future of the esports industry, since that is his domain. And I want to really quickly, before we get started with the show love to our amazing community. Yo, show some love in the comments if you are loving this episode and you're going to be tuning in for the long haul. Let me know where you're tuning in from, and I will shout you out as I bring on Dre to the show. With that said, without further ado, let me bring on DAndres. What's up, Dre? How's it going, man?
How's it going, man? It's always good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too, brother. How are you hanging in there during COVID-19?
Yeah, man. I'm doing as well as I can given the circumstances. It doesn't help that I live in LA, and so the weather is so nice. It almost like deceives you. It's like there's no way COVID's out there.
Yeah,
it's like it's so beautiful outside. But you know, we're doing good. Family is good. I'm good and healthy, so I can't really complain too much.
dude, I love that, man. I'm so happy to hear that. And same here too. I'm actually currently in Houston, and the weather has been beautiful, man.
Yeah,
A lot of people have been stating that throughout this period, it's almost been like the Mother Nature has leveraged this time to just recalibrate, refresh.
seriously. So yeah, man. I know it's a crazy time in the world, but trying to find some positivity when I can. So just seeing the sun shine is always a good thing for me.
Yeah, man, I love it. Abundance mindset. So, Dre, man, I would love for you to. Well, before we get started, let me show love to Tope, who's tuning in from Cleveland, Ohio. What's up, Tope? You are awesome. Thank you so much for tuning in. Sheila, she says this is her first live session, and she's tuning in from upstate New York and looking forward to more sessions in the future. Most definitely, Sheila, and more importantly, there's going to be awesome guests that will be on in the future as well. So definitely keep tuning in. And more importantly, make sure to be a part of the Guide community and sign up for early access to Guide. And shout out to Ernest, who's tuning in from Latvia. And he loves our content. He loves my content. Ernest, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you. And you're going to love this episode with Dre.
Yeah.
So, Dre, man, I want you to share a little bit about, your journey, into the work you do as one of the leading product managers in the world, I believe, because you're stellar at what you do in your craft. But more importantly, what was that origin story and how you got to what you're doing right now, man?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. So I got started when I was in college. So a couple of friends of mine, and still good friends of mine, we went to high school together. We started our first company. It was an on-demand delivery service for college students. So it was like DoorDash, Uber Eats for college students, and we were doing this back in like 2012. So it was in the very early stages of what what we see now in the market of like on-demand delivery and food service. And so look, we taught ourselves everything we needed to know to build a company: how to design, how to talk to users, how to even code. One of my good friends, Rodney Gaines, he's still a software engineer to this day, but he didn't know iOS at the time. He only knew Android. So he literally taught himself iOS. I learned how to code as well. So, we kind of just hustled and learned our skill and kind of built the product, launched it, operated it for a couple years. And then, we were unsuccessful in raising money. And like, a lot of startups, we had to kind of close the door. And so when we closed that door, I had to at least make a decision for myself on like, what was I going to do with my career? Was I going to, start another company, or was I going to kind of jump into the workforce? And so I came across this Ben Horowitz article in 2012, actually, like right when I was starting my company, called Good Product Manager, Bad Product Manager.
Yeah. I love that article. Classic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's a classic. And at the time, I really didn't know like what a product manager was. You know, like
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, this sounds interesting, right? Like I read the description, I was like, all right, it kind of sounds like a mini CEO as they kind of describe it. It sounds like, you know, let me jump into this product management thing. And so, luckily, a good friend of mine was starting a company in Detroit called Rocket Fiber at the time. And so he was building gigabit speed internet. And I was like, you know what, let me talk to him and tell him like, you know, I could be a product manager. I know something about product at least. And he
Yeah.
gave me a shot. And so he hired me and I was a really early employee. And the company had raised about $31 million from Dan Gilbert.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so it was crazy. And that was like I think probably the largest, you know, round for a startup in Detroit at the time, at least if I'm not mistaken. So like that was huge. It was like, yo, I'm at one of the biggest, you know, companies in Detroit in terms of like capital raise from a startup standpoint. And I
Yeah.
was really early on. I think it was like an employee number 10 or 11 or something like that. Super early on. And so I did that for a little bit and I learned a lot and it was a really cool experience. And then I
Uh-oh. Dre has on us, I believe. Let's hope he comes back on.
ended up
But
leaving the company
as he
to go
tries to
kind of getting to where I am now. And then I ended up moving to Los Angeles. I'm sorry, to San Francisco actually to do consulting. And originally, when I moved out there, I didn't know anybody, and I wanted to dive into product management. I was really interested in consulting because consulting allowed me to really work across many different businesses and kind of see how different industries operate versus being stuck in one sector. And so I did that for a little bit, and then I ended up joining Disney, and then leaving Disney to join PlayVS about a year and a half ago. So it's been a long, interesting journey of different industries and different products and learning different
Hmm.
things.
Man, so what was that moment like for you when, when that guy gave you a chance, an opportunity to start your career in product?
Man, it was crazy.
Yeah.
I really appreciate him a lot. You know, my whole entire career has been about me getting chances, right? Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here today without those chances. Um,
Yeah.
like I stand on the shoulders of like the people that come before me. You
Mm.
know, I'm just getting started in my career. That's how I feel about it. And so, without the chances of my good friend Mark Hudson, who started Rocket Fiber, I wouldn't be here. When I moved to San Francisco and got into consulting, one of the greatest mentors I ever had, his name is Cyrus. Him and his brother had started a really successful company called AdThis, and they sold it to Oracle for like $200 million. And I mean, I would not be where I am today without him. Like he taught me so much about
Mm.
just how to change my way of thinking about product and how to approach it from just like from a strategy standpoint. How do I assess the opportunities? How do I look at markets? How do I think about
Mm.
technology? How do I think about design? Just like framing my giving me frameworks is really what he did. And that was like one of the most impactful people I've ever met in my journey. And so without him, I wouldn't have got at Disney. And without Disney, I probably certainly wouldn't be at PlayVS today. So every single opportunity has been about somebody giving me a chance and me proving
Mm.
myself, and that's setting me up for whatever the next opportunity was.
Yeah. I want you to share a little bit about, what do you think are some of the strongest frameworks or skill sets that make up a good product leader and manager, right? Because I think a lot of, early career product managers I talk with, or people who want to get into product, or who want to just, build something, they don't really understand how do you build something that actually
Yeah.
solves a problem or a need. And how do you do conduct market research, how do you do user research, what are the frameworks you use? So share a little bit about some of the frameworks or skills you think make a really strong product person.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's like four like key areas. There's obviously a slew of different things, right? And it
Mhm.
varies by industry and it varies by company. There's a lot of different variances. But from my perspective, I think there's like four key areas. Like one is just like product sense, right?
Yeah.
And product sense is around like design, and it goes back to what you just mentioned, which is like how do you solve the problem? How do you think about the user, right? How do you think about the journey of a product? How do you think about like how users will interact with it, right? It's the visual element. It's like, can you take an ambiguous problem and can you design something around it? Can you design a solution for it? Right. And I think that's very important to be able to do that. Obviously, as a PM, I'm not necessarily designing the product end to end. I have a designer, right? And we have a lot of other people to help out with that. But it's good for me to understand how how you go through that process and how you start mapping out those journeys. So that's one area, which is product sense. The second area that I think is really important is product execution. And execution really comes down to strategy, right? Like, how do you think about the strategy of a product? Should you go into certain markets? Should you not go into certain markets? How do you think about pricing that product, right, relative to other products you may be in that market? And it's just like, how do you go from 0 to 1 on a product, right? Like, how do you go from that design that you have to actually getting it to users' hands to validating if the assumptions you made are even correct? And it all comes down to execution and managing a team and the process of doing that. So I think that's important. The third piece that I think is important is leadership, right? And I think like your ability as a PM to demonstrate leadership amongst the team and in the company is super important. A lot of people are really looking at you as a person who's able to drive decisions, who's able to get things across the line when needed, who's able to be a diplomat between cross-functional teams in the company. And so you have to be able to have strong leadership and communication skills. And I think that's really important. And be able to balance multiple perspectives, right? Because as a PM, you're getting perspectives from the engineers, you're getting perspectives from the designers, you're getting perspectives from the business, right? And so you want to be able to have those multiple perspectives and your own perspective as well, and be able to weed out, you know, the decision that needs to be made in order to drive value for the business and drive value for the users, but also make sure you're taking care of the team, right? Because you can't execute without the team. And then I think the fourth bucket is super important. I think it's highly under leveraged by a lot of PMs is data, right? And it's how you look at data, how you think about data, and how you ask the right questions to the data, right? You can measure an unlimited amount of things, but really, that's not really the thing that's going to get you moving forward, right? You really want to understand what is the one thing I should be looking at, or the two things I should be looking at for success, right? And like, how do you measure those things, and like, how do you back into those things, right? And so I think those are like the 4 areas that I think a PM should optimize on being strong in. And like, those are the areas that I've tried to get better at in my career. And I'm still working on it. By no means am I like a master at it. But those are just 4 areas that I think are really important.
So leadership, really understanding how to leverage data, having that product sense to be able to gauge opportunities. And I think you also mentioned, like, you know, the process of being able to be a diplomat as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I think that's really powerful, because that's a framework right there.
Yeah,
that you just gave, you know, to some of the people watching and listening. And it's a really powerful framework too, because nowadays I think, you know, this is I think due to COVID-19, there's an abundance of opportunities and gaps to be solved if you want to build anything right now. And you need to be able to source, and you need to be able to lead and build a team. And, you know, I can speak to, shout out to William, who is saying this is a great conversation. Shout out to Mr. Cunningham, who's awesome, and development officer for one of the awesome nonprofits in the Seattle area. He's saying great conversation, confidence, knowledge, and passion. We need to get this type of conversation in front of the young students to learn from you both. I agree 100%, William. We are working on it. I need to follow up with you soon, by the way, brother. Ernest is saying he's tuning in from Latvia as well, which is really, really dope. Mitchell is saying hello from Denver. Shout out to Mitchell. Thank you so much for tuning in, my brother. I appreciate you. You know, this is a fantastic conversation that we're having with Dre. And one of the reasons why I really want to have Dre on the podcast is he's just a wealth of knowledge on this. And, you know, I want to ask you, you know, you've made all of these pivots into what you're doing right now with PlayVS. And, you know, you all are innovating in the esports space.
Yep.
Which is one of the most booming industries right now that I'm keeping track of. I want you to share a little bit about, you know, PlayVS, what the culture is like at PlayVS, as well as, you know, how you got passionate about esports. Was this something that you were always interested in?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I'll go back a little bit to come back forward. So Delane, the co-founder of PlayVS, is a really good friend of mine. We've been friends for a long time. We actually knew each other. He's from Detroit as well. Yeah. So we knew each other way before I even moved to California, and for him as well. And so I got actually introduced to esports from him. So when he was working at Rocket Fiber with me. And so he was leading like our biz dev team and a couple other things. And so he ended up getting connected with someone who was already involved in esports, and he just got like fascinated about his space. I mean, like he talked about it all the time, and I used to sit next to him. And so like he used to talk to me about it all the time. Like every day we would just talk about esports, and we would just talk about like what the future of it could look like. And at the time I was just like, you know, like I don't know if this thing is going to really be anything, but he was passionate about it. And if anybody knows Dwayne, like once he's passionate about something, his passion like bubbles up, right? Like it comes off of him and it like spills over into everybody else. And so like it landed on me. And so I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. And so fast forward a couple years later, when I saw that he had this opportunity in the high school space, I was like, okay, this is interesting, right? Like I already knew a little bit about esports, but then when you connect the esports to high school and like the angle that he took on it, I was like, wow, this is really interesting, right? Like he's built like a really defensible business by having the partnerships with the NFHS and then having the partnerships with the publisher. I was like, from a strategy standpoint, right? And I'm thinking as a PM, like I'm thinking about the market, thinking about like the competition. I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. And then the explosion of esports. I have a little brother who's a really avid gamer, and so I get to understand what are the kids doing, and he's in that age, right? That age, that demographic that we serve. And so by just seeing his behavior, seeing what Dwayne was doing, I was like, man, this is interesting. So let me come back and check this out. And
you're
so
prospecting. You're sensing the opportunity. What's the opportunity here?
Exactly. That's how I was doing it. And I was like, this is really interesting. So that got me really more interested in the opportunity and got me wanting to talk to Dwayne about like what a potential, what it could potentially look like if I were to join.
Wow, man, that's powerful. So, let me get your thoughts. What's it like working with PlayVS? You all have probably a unique gaming culture, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a competitive environment, right? Like it's a very competitive environment, but it's positive. But it's positive competition. Like we want to win. We want to win really badly, and we have a leader who has a vision that's really big, and he's really strong on that. And so I think that propagates throughout the company, right? And I think we're a culture that's about ownership and accountability. And so it's really important for everybody to have some piece of ownership stake in what we're doing, right? And so even from the product standpoint, I try to do my best job as a PM to make sure everybody's included in the conversation. And as a PM, again, you have to balance the collective decision making versus me having to make a decision, of course. But you want to be as vocal as possible, and you want to allow everybody to have a voice. And so across the company, like everybody has a say in like how we build our product, right? Everybody's included in our demos on Fridays, and everybody knows what we're building, and everybody knows why we're building it. So it's a culture that's very transparent, I would say, across the board, in terms, at least from the product and engineering standpoint, and very open to feedback, very open to criticism, right? Very open to people giving us their perspective. And also, too, like we're really big in the community. We really care about what our users think about what we're doing. And so we spend a lot of time building communities around our coaches. We have a super coach program where we have coaches across the country kind of a part of like a program in which, we highlight them, right? And we honor them for the work that they do in our network. And so, we do a lot of interviews with them. We talk to them a lot. We also talk to our players. We go on site and we actually listen and see how players are using our product. Wow. So it's a very product-driven, very product and engineering-driven culture, and a culture that's really built around accountability, around transparency, and around competition. I mean, we really want to win. We've been given a great opportunity, and so from our perspective, the only thing that stops us from winning is our ability to execute. And so that's what we try to bring every single day.
And that's the product mindset, right? Like just iteration, execution, being really obsessed with the problem. I think it's really hard to foster and instill this mindset in a lot of people who don't get product manager, or they've never really worked in a product-centric organization, but it's this constant grit to say, how do we iterate? How do we be as close to the customer as possible? And I love that, that y'all have that within the PlayVS culture, because, it's also, I think it ties back to what we're working with Guide is it's also developing a learner centric mindset, right? Like product people and, organizations are always learning more about the customer so you can create more value for them, right?
Absolutely.
And you never stop learning. That's just the I think the core ethos to product and just building a successful organization too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and the culture has changed. We've grown a lot, right? Like when I first joined, the company was really small, and now we have about 60 people on the team. And so as you grow, as you scale, the culture has to kind of grow and scale with that. And sometimes that means the culture morphs into something else. It doesn't necessarily mean it's worse or it's better. It just means it's a little bit different, right? And so we've gone from this small startup to now like a real business now. We have to operate like a real business. And so that means the culture changes a little bit, but we still try to remain nimble and still try to have that day one mindset. At least from the product standpoint, like we feel like we're never done. We're only one, it's like the Facebook mindset where it's like we're 1% done. And that's how I approach it. It's like I don't care how good of a feature we ship. We're just getting started. We're never done yet. and that's how we approach it.
Well, I want to dive deep here and gloss on a different topic area. How do you kind of balance for you as a product leader? How do you balance, shipping what you know is necessary, but then as well as what customers want? How do you make that balance? Because everyone knows when you're in product, it's a really delicate balancing act in trying to create harmony between, okay, this is what we know we really need to drive more value, but then like our customers are always asking for this. What do you do to balance that, man?
Yeah, one thing I try to do is keep a fine line between user interests, business interests, shareholders' interests, publishing partner interests. Yeah. And they should never be misaligned. From my perspective, we should always be focused on like what's the best thing that we should do for the user. Because I firmly believe that when we keep the user's interest at the forefront, right, and we solve the user's problems, it always comes back and it benefits the business, which benefits the shareholders, which benefits our publishing partners, right? Like whenever companies start having problems with that, it's because usually they try to put either the stakeholders, the shareholders, or the business above the users, right? And that's a disconnect, right? And so I think it's the same approach in Amazon take, which is like customer obsession. And I think like that is the best way to build great product, is to be obsessive about the customer experience, be obsessive about the problem. And when you do that, I think it aligns with every other interest in the business, and everybody becomes aligned. And so that's the perspective that I take on that.
That's powerful, man.
Yeah. And so we try to make sure, like, and we have a core product value, we have a core company value around that, which is player experience first. And we believe that. And so whenever we're making a decision, it's like, are we putting our players first? Are we putting our coaches first? Right? Because those are the constituents that really matter, right? If they aren't using our product, it doesn't matter what we do on this end, right? It's like, are we putting them first? And whenever that's a no, then we need to go back and figure out, what did we do wrong? Right? And then if we say yes to that, then we need to figure out, how do we make the business work around that? Because we're solving a problem that really matters for them. And I think, that's the most important part for us.
Man, that's powerful, man. And that customer obsession is real, because a lot of people just don't, it's a mindset. It's a true care for what does the actual creator, the player, the person that is ordering, three products on Amazon per day. What do they want? Not what the shareholders want. And I think every challenge for any product leader, any CEO, any exec is balancing the interests of multiple parties and stakeholders, like you mentioned. But once again, customer obsession wins. And I think similar to you, Dre, one of the values that we've really imbued within Guide is, how do we focus on being of service, not to the shareholders, but being of service to the customer. Right?
Exactly. That pays way more dividends in the long run. Believe me.
Yeah, it does. So I want to talk to you a little bit about esports, man, because I'm keeping track of esports. I have some relationships I'm building currently in that area, and I'm like, hey, is there an opportunity to invest? What can we do right here in esports that or how do we tie our brand at Guide to some of the things going on in the esports industry? What are your thoughts, man? Because I think you know this industry better than anyone that I know within my friend group. Where do you see esports going in the next 3 to 5 years, man? Where is it at right now?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think esports has been around for a long time, but maybe we didn't have the right label for it, right? Like the concept of just like competitive gaming, and some structured format has existed for a while, but again, we didn't have the right terminology for it. So it seems relatively new now. But for us right now, we're really focused on 2 existing markets, which is the high school market. So building it out as a competitive sport within high school. And then the second part of that is in the collegiate market, which is building it out or continuing to build it out and own the platform for the collegiate space. It's existed in collegiate for a while as well, but we're kind of coming in with the infrastructure and the piping to make it consistent. Because one of the problems with esports that we see, at least, or that I see from my perspective, is it's fragmented, right? Like it's very fragmented, right? Because you have a lot of different studios. It's very similar to like what you see in the movie industry, right? Like in the entertainment industry. It's the same thing, right? Where you have all these different companies or studios that are building this intellectual property, and they all operate slightly different, right? Like the way the Overwatch League works or operates is different than the way the Fortnite works, which is a whole different publisher, right? And so we see our role in the market is to try to create some sense of consistency and continuity between the different esports that exist out there, right? And that's what we're doing in the high school right now. and in collegiate. And, at some point, maybe we go beyond that and we go to a much broader market where we can bring consistency and continuity between these different esports, and make the experience pretty similar. And again, that's what we do in high school today. So, we offer League of Legends, Rocket League, Smite, Fortnite, and we try to build a consistent experience around that, which again, before us, like, it just didn't exist. It was very fragmented and very jaded. And so we try to bring it all together. And the second thing I'll add to that is I think, as new type of interfaces are born, for example, VR, and I'm really bullish on VR. I think that's going to also change the landscape of esports. And I think it's going to change in ways that we aren't able to necessarily articulate today. We don't necessarily know what that means. But like one of my favorite movies is like Ready Player One. And so I actually believe like that is the future. And that's the future that I'm really excited for. And I hope
that's the future you want to build.
Yeah, I hope that's the future we get a chance to build for. And so I think a lot about like the future, computing platforms out there. I think a lot about cloud gaming as well, which brings more accessibility to people, because a lot of these games still require significant hardware. That's certainly changed a little bit with mobile. You see things like Animal Crossing, which isn't necessarily esports, but it's taken off in popularity. So you're seeing a lot of things with like the competitive side of esports, which is what we operate in, but then the casual side of gaming, which is more so social, which could have some element of esports baked into it at some point in time. And hopefully PlayVS has an opportunity to play a role in that. So there's a lot of things happening, but right now we're really focused on high school and college and making that the best that we can make it.
Yeah, ruthless prioritization. I love it. I love it. I think, it's one of the powerful traits of any great product manager, being able to see, the long-term, the future, but also being able to operate in the present immaculately well.
Yeah, gotta do that.
I love that, man. I love that. So shout out to Joel, who's saying he's tuning in from Ivory Coast. Shout out to my boy, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, what's good, Fi? I actually went to college with that guy. That is my profile. He is tuning in. Appreciate you, Jeff. And shout out to Ricardo, who just pulled up the good product manager / bad product manager article. He's definitely going to give it a read. You better give it a read, Ricardo. You'll love the book, man. Ricardo also says, what practical steps do PMs take to frame a proper understanding of their market and competitors? What are your thoughts on that, Dre? Because I actually have some thoughts on this.
So the question is, how do you frame the market?
Yeah. So what are some practical steps that a product manager can take to frame a proper understanding of their market and competitors?
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, just like starting with the user, right? Like, who is the user, right? What problem are you trying to solve for them, and what problem are you trying to solve, and then try to understand what do they do in order to solve that problem today, right? So what are some of the alternatives and substitute products or alternative services or products that they use today, and trying to understand where are the gaps between those solutions and then the problem that the customer is trying to solve. Because just because there's a solution out there doesn't necessarily mean that it fully solves the problem. Right? Like a good example of that is like if you go back to like the taxi industry, for example. Like the taxi industry solved the problem of getting you from point A to point B. But when you really start digging under the hood, you really start to see Uber solve some really critical problems, which is like payment, for example, or consistency and reliability, right? Knowing exactly when a taxi was going to get to you, right? So when you really start digging in there, you really start seeing it's a lot bigger than just going from point A to point B. It's really payment. It's really reliability. It's really consistency. It's really predictability, right? It's all the things that the taxi industry didn't have. Safety, right? Exactly. Safety, right? Like exactly building like the rating system and different things like that. So like when you really dig into that, then it becomes obvious. It's like, oh, Uber's way better than what exists in the market today. Right? But if you just looked at it from a surface level, then you would have never recognized that. You would have just said, well, people already have a way to get from point A to point B, so I'm not even going to touch that. So it's really understanding the user, understanding what are the pain points that they really have, and then really digging through and assessing like what are they using to solve it, and then really understanding like those gaps between like the problem and the real solution. It's just one simple way to do it. And as I mentioned, Uber is a really good case study for understanding that.
Yeah, man, that's powerful. So shout out to Dre, who was dropping gems throughout this episode, man. My boy Mark Brown, what tools and process has your team implemented to keep productivity high in this new remote work environment? That's a great question, Mark. Dre, what are your thoughts on that, man?
Yeah, so some of the tools we use is One, we have daily, or we have actually twice a day, we talk on video. And that's super simple, but I think it's really important that we see each other, we hear each other, and we talk to each other, not just in the context of like what we need to execute on for the day, but just like, how are your family, man? Like, how are your kids doing? Like, you know, how how are you doing, right, as a person? So just really trying to make that connection with people, I think, is important. We do happy hours on Friday, and so that's a really great time for us to kind of come together and just, again, just talk about life. Just like, you know, there's a lot of things happening right now in the world. And so we want to make sure that when we engage our coworkers, we aren't just engaging in terms of like the business, but also just making sure like we're human, right? And we really care about our people, and we want to make sure they're healthy and doing well. But, you know, again, to answer your question, like having those video calls throughout the day have been really helpful. Just keeping a pulse on one another. But also too, we try to do like, have like game times with each other. So I mean, obviously at a company that integrates a lot of different games, we also play games with each other, and we found that like playing games with each other has been a really great way to kind of build a strong culture. Like we play Fortnite together, and it's crazy because we have to communicate, right? We have to talk, we have to like really understand like how each other plays the game. So it forces a different level of understanding the person. I think we actually have to like be on a team and work together to accomplish a goal outside of just like the work and the day-to-day work life. So those are just some of the small things we do, but by no means are we perfect at it. We're still trying to figure out the balance because we were not a remote culture before COVID-19. So we have to become one really quickly, and we're learning, you know, every single week how we can improve upon that.
Yeah, man, that's powerful. Great answer. You know, shout out to Mark for that powerful question. So shout out to our homeboy, Rodney Gaines Jr., founder and CEO at Safe, man. They are revolutionizing the security industry. You know, what are the best ways to train users on new features?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good
one, man.
That's a good one. Let me think about that one, because I think there's many tactics on that one.
Yeah. You know, I think so going back to, because to the question Ricardo asked, you know, now we're living in a very dynamic age, Ricardo. And one of the things I try to tell product people is that don't even think about the competition. Think about the customer, as Dre mentioned. But also when you think about the market, forecast is similar to kind of gaming. There's players, and they have their strengths, right? So, for example, in the market that we're operating, guys, there's millions of products that help with learning and e-learning. And they have their own individual. There's many players in the market, and it's not a winner takes all market. There's very few winner take all markets. Even in cloud computing, it's not even a winner take all market.
That is true.
There's like actually great leaders, and there's people who are okay and have their certain niche. So think about your market and your competition from a sense of, all right, who are the players? What are their value propositions? And then come back to you from a product standpoint. What do I want to build, and for what type of customer? Right? Because no player solves every problem for every customer. There's certain companies that want to be everything to everybody, but those same companies are nothing to no one because they try to be everything to everybody. So that's a tidbit right there. Thoughts on that, Dre?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. There's very few markets that are winner take all markets. Some markets are just so big. I mean, even like you know, some people would argue against this, but even like Amazon, like you know, a lot of the policymakers in Washington like to ask the question about if Amazon is a monopoly. And the reality is like the market that Amazon is in is just so massive. Right? Like, it's so massive. It's so massive to the point where Amazon couldn't own the market by themselves. Right? Like, they just couldn't.
Shopify is actually, you know, right there with them. Shopify is killing it.
Shopify is a sleeper, man. People are sleeping on Shopify. They're a huge threat to Amazon. So yeah, to your point, a lot of markets are there's not a lot of markets that are winner take all. Very few are, in fact. And the second thing to that, even if there is a leader that's in the market and you're getting a little bit discouraged, there's a term called just value and innovation, right? And value creation. So figure out like, how do you create more value, and how do you innovate on top of the existing market? Again, a really good example of that is Uber, right? Like if you were just looking at it from the onset, you would have think, like I said, I'm not going to jump into the taxi business. It's already owned, especially in New York, right? Like there's like 1 or 2 companies, 3 companies that own the entire market. Why would you even hop into that, right? But when you really dive into it, you start to understand there's a whole new market and there's a whole new problem set that's just being ignored. And so that's one way to kind of go into a market and have an advantage. But to go back to your other question, who asked the question of like, how do you get new users to use your product? Was that the question?
Yeah, Rodney.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's multiple ways that I've seen it done. There's like the premise of doing things that don't scale model, which is like Superhuman is a really good example. So those who don't know, Superhuman is a email client app that has taken a new approach to email. They're all about speed. They're all about efficiency and shortcuts, and it's really cool product. But in order to use Superhuman, like you have to go through like a white glove onboarding exercise with someone from their company, right? So you sign up for Superhuman, and they actually have a person call you and walk you through like a 30-minute walkthrough of exactly how to use Superhuman, how do you get the product value out of Superhuman. And so that's one way to do it, right? And that's a slow way to do it, but that's an efficient way to do it because that guarantees that the people that you onboard really understands how to use the product, and it creates a one-to-one human connection. The other way to do it is through like actual in-product, maybe like through in-product tours or in-product walkthroughs or interactive ways to like use the product. So like, you see it sometimes when you sign up for a new product, they have like these product tours that kind of show you how to do it. And those are okay, right? Those are like the old traditional way to do it. Sometimes they're effective, sometimes they're not. But then there's like a third way to do it, which I think is a little bit more interesting, which is have the user actually start engaging with the feature as like an onboarding experience, right? Meaning that as they're onboarding, they're actually starting to use the product and create value as they're doing it. And a really good example of that is like Trello, for example. When you're signing up for Trello, they actually have you like start setting up like what is like your first board going to be called. And, like they actually have you like building out a Trello board through onboarding. And so before you know it, as a user, you've learned how to use Trello and you've only onboarded the product, right? You haven't even gotten to the product and you already have an understanding of how to use the product. And so that's a really good way to get people to use it, is have it a part of onboarding. So as they're signing up, they're actually experiencing the product, and then before you know it, they actually understand how to use it, right? And then you drop them into the main experience. And so like there's many ways to do it, but those are just a couple ways that I've seen.
Yeah, through onboarding. And also, I mean, to add to Dre's point, Rodney, whatever feature it is, if it's high priority and it really is the feature that creates the value of the product or allows the value of the product to be very clear, then it definitely needs to go into onboarding in a very seamless fashion, man. One of the things I love too, Dre, as a designer, is that the beauty of any feature is how you examine and evaluate the customer using it, but it does take really simplicity, clear design, UX to make a great product feature.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of companies that do that really well. Like I love Airbnb. They're one of my favorite, man. They do that phenomenally well.
Yeah, simplicity is crystal clear in their product. For sure. Yeah, so shout out to Mark, man, who's dropping awesome questions, man. Shout out to you, Mark, man. Appreciate you for tuning in, brother. How differentiators did you have to consider? What differentiators did you have to consider when designing your product for high schoolers versus college students?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're still trying to figure that out, to be honest. But I think a couple things that come to mind to me is that high school is competitive, but it's not. It's like a subset of what we've seen, at least from the behavior. There's a subset of high schoolers who are just strictly there or strictly want to play esports. Because they just enjoy the community aspect, right? Like it isn't the end all be all for them, right? Like they just love being in the community and being in that environment, right? And then you have a subset of high schoolers who are super hyper competitive, right? And they really want to win, right? And they can care less about the social aspect. They really just want to dominate. But what we see in the college behavior is that it's more linked towards like the domination side, right? The hyper competitive, like college students, I should say, like really care about the competition, right? And so like, knowing that they really care about the competition, there's a different way that we have to engage them in terms of like the data, right? Like what information can we give a college player to help them make better decisions about the competitor that they're playing against? It doesn't mean like we show that information from the high school players, but we just know that insight and that the level of depth that we have to go, it's just more required for the collegiate space, right? They need more of that. They need more stats. They need more information. Because there's a lot more on the line. Usually there's probably scholarships on the line. There's just a lot more at stake for them sometimes. And so like that just drives a higher level of competition. Also too, like usually it's less of them, right? On like a varsity college team than it is on like a high school team. So just due to like the constraint and number of people, that's going to drive a more competitive environment. And so just out of that competition, that just requires a different set of tools. than is necessarily required in like the high school space. But look, we've only operated in college for one season, and so we're still trying to learn that. And so a lot of the information and data we have now, it's going to be evolving over the next couple of seasons. And so we'll be building out a lot more things, and hopefully there'll be a lot more parity between high school and college.
Yeah, 120%, man. That's great jams, man. I want to ask you, man, and dive back into our conversation. You as a product manager right now, what do you think the future of remote product management looks like, man?
Man, that's interesting. Honestly, I don't think it changes too much. And the reason why I say that is because as a PM, I think you have to be able to communicate really well across many different stacks, right? So you have to be able to you have to be able to communicate well in written text and format, which is I do a lot of things in written text, right? Whether it's requirement documents or whether it's like proposal memos or decks for presenting a demo, whatever the case is, right? So you have to be strong there, but then you have to be strong in in-person communication, as well as video, whatever the case may be. So I think like as a PM, it doesn't really change much for me because I still have to execute at the same level across all these stats, regardless of whether I'm in person or remote. So it doesn't change. It doesn't change anything. I think the one thing it changes is just making sure consistently, at least for me, consistently checking on my team to make sure everybody's in the loop. Because I hate that. I hate like when major decisions are made and people are left out of the loop. So I'm constantly making sure like, hey, my engineering manager and I are in sync. And he understands as decisions change. And so just making sure that everybody's in the loop, and Slack is a great way to do that. And so again, whether we're in the office or whether we're at home, keeping a team on, making sure the team has a pulse on decisions in Slack or through email or through Notion or whatever tool we use is something we should be doing regardless of where we're working. So for me, my workflow hasn't really changed much. I'm communicating at the same level, same quality, same consistency as before.
Yeah. Making sure they're seeing what you see, man. I think and to your point too, it's interesting that right now the opportunities and the challenges that some organizations may have, and how do you continue to have a very autonomous product team that's aligned in a remote first world, right? Because a lot of organizations aren't going back to the office until maybe next year. It seems like
it's crazy.
It's crazy, man.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, I think checking in, having that empathy, really understand how do you rally the team around, what's going on and keep them motivated. That's really important, man. I think long term for companies that are going remote.
Absolutely.
So Shay is saying, walk me through how you develop junior product managers. How do you measure their progress? Shout out to Shay Chambers.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing is to try to surround yourself with people who are better than you. And that's what I did. Like, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, my mentor from San Francisco, Cyrus, he had been a chief product officer. He was also an engineer. So, he was years ahead of me. So I surrounded myself around him as much as possible, asked a bunch of questions. But I think the thing you have to do if you're starting out with anything is first define your own success. What does success look like for you, right? What does success even mean for you? In your own role, what are some of the things you expect to get out of it? Because I think if you don't define that, then it's hard to measure against that. And then I think the second thing is if you do have a mentor or someone who's more senior than you, who's kind of helping you and guiding you, I think getting alignment from them on what success means for them, right? If they're going to be mentoring you and they're going to be advising you, then what does success as an advisor mean to them, right? And then I think always checking that pulse between, does their success and mentoring you line up with what you're getting out of it, right? And making sure those two things align. But I think just first it starts with defining that. You have to understand what it is you're trying to get out of it, and then that's how you keep a pulse on it consistently. But certainly, I would say try to surround yourself with people. Try to find a community. Because I think that's really important if you're starting out in something new, so that you don't feel alone, because you don't know what you don't know. And so it's certainly important to have good feedback and be willing to be vulnerable. I think that's important as you're coming up in anything. Is be willing to accept criticism and just get better at it.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. Great answer to a great question by Shay. With that said, I want to give the last word to the homie Mark Brown, who is saying, thanks, appreciate your time. You and your team are doing incredible work. Shout out to Mark. You have the last word for today's episode. And I want Dre to, what are some takeaways that you want our amazing community of folks who are watching to think about as they either get into product management or they think about their careers long term, man?
Man, I would say I go back to what I said. If you're specifically trying to get into product management, hone in on the product sense, hone in on product execution, hone in on leadership, and hone in on data, because I think that'll take you a long way. Even if you decide to go beyond product management and become a startup founder, if you decide to get into venture capital, a lot of VCs are former product managers. And so I think being a product manager gives you exposure to across the business, right? It's beyond just product. It's understanding business, understanding marketing, understanding psychology, both
organizational design.
Yeah, organizational design, right?
Yeah.
And it's psychology at the user level, but also at the team level, right? You got to understand like when the engineers are burnt out, right? And how to pull it back because they're just burnt out and they can't deliver anymore. Right. So it's like it's a lot of different things you have to understand. And so I think honing in on those skills and just practicing those skills definitely help you beyond just product management itself. But if you're trying to just go, get further in your career in general, I think it's always helpful to find community, always be willing to ask for feedback, and always be willing to just get better, and always approach, in my opinion, approach life with a 1% mindset. You're only 1% done. You're just getting started. And I don't care how successful you are. You can always be more successful. And so just always be willing to learn and take in different things. I think is super important.
Love it, Dre. Every day is day one. Every day is day one. And shout out to Shay, who says thank you. So Shay and Mark, y'all two get the last word. I appreciate you all for tuning in to another episode of Unleashing the Future of Work, a guy podcast. If you're interested in being on a future, please check us out on UTFOWLive.com.
We should get Mark
in being on an episode, or someone, or someone like Mark Brown who should be on another episode of the Unleashing the Future of Work podcast. Check it out. And also, if you're interested in sponsoring as well, we are open to discussing that as well. So I appreciate you all for tuning in and having the lovely Dre bless you all with all kinds of gems on how to get into product management, and more importantly, where the future of esports is going. Dre, where can the people connect with you, man?
All my social media handles just Dre Unlimited. I don't know why that's just the name, but yeah. Find me everywhere, just Dre Unlimited, LinkedIn, DAndres Ealy. Happy to connect and talk with anybody. I'm always open, so I'm happy to set up any time with anybody who wants to talk.
He's accessible, y'all. Make sure you definitely connect with him because he's a wealth of knowledge and he's killing it in his domain. With that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in on another episode of Unleashing the Future of Work live. Peace, love, and I will talk to you all soon. Boom.